The press conference was packed. Cameras flashed, microphones lined the stage, and reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, eager to fire their questions at one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson had been through this routine 1,000 times, promoting his latest blockbuster while flashing his signature grin. But this time, something felt off. Among the sea of reporters, one stood out. Not because of his credentials, but because of his smirk. He leaned forward, gripping his microphone tightly, eyes locked onto the rock like a predator circling its prey. "Dwayne, let's be real for a second," the reporter began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're a great entertainer, no doubt. But do you really think you're a serious actor? I mean, come on, you started as a wrestler." The room fell silent. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most people just stared. The question wasn't just disrespectful, it was meant to humiliate. The Rock, sitting comfortably in his chair, didn't react right away. He leaned back, arms crossed over his massive frame, a thoughtful expression on his face. The tension in the room thickened. The reporter, sensing he had struck a nerve, pushed further. "I mean, let's be honest. Do you ever feel like a fraud when you stand next to real actors? People with, actual training?" A collective gasp echoed across the room. It was a low blow, and everyone knew it. The Rock's eyes flickered with something. Not anger, not offense, but something deeper. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable weight behind his words. "That's a good question," he said, nodding slowly. "But let me ask you one in return." The reporter blinked. The crowd leaned in. "When did you decide that hard work wasn't enough?" The Rock continued, his voice smooth yet commanding. "When did you decide that where someone starts should determine where they're allowed to go?" The room went completely silent, and in that moment everyone realized the real question wasn't about The Rock's acting. It was about something much bigger, and what happened next would make headlines across the world. The air in the press conference room was thick with tension. Reporters sat frozen, eyes darting between The Rock and the smug reporter who had just tried to humiliate him on live television. But instead of reacting with anger, The Rock leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the table. His expression remained calm, but his presence alone filled the room with an unshakable authority. "Let me repeat that question for you," he said, locking eyes with the reporter. "When did you decide that hard work wasn't enough?" The reporter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a defensive response, maybe a forced joke to brush it off. But The Rock wasn't brushing anything off. "I started as a wrestler," The Rock continued. "You're right about that. But let me ask you something else. Do you know what I did before wrestling?" The reporter hesitated, his confidence cracking. "I was a kid who watched his parents struggle to pay rent," The Rock said, his voice steady. "I was a teenager who lost everything when we got evicted. I was an athlete who had to start over when my dreams of playing pro football ended. And then, I was a wrestler who was booed out of arenas before I learned how to make people believe in me." The room was dead silent. No one dared to move. "So, yeah," he said, nodding. "I started as a wrestler. And do you know what that taught me? It taught me discipline. It taught me resilience. It taught me that success doesn't come from a title. It comes from grit." The reporter swallowed hard. His earlier smirk was gone. The Rock wasn't finished. "You sit here," he continued, gesturing at the rows of reporters, "and you ask me if I think I belong? My question is, who gave you the right to decide who belongs anywhere?" A murmur spread through the audience. Other reporters looked at each other, realizing the weight of what was unfolding before them. The Rock leaned back in his chair, his expression still composed. "See, I've never asked for permission to chase my dreams. And if I worried about people like you, people who think they can measure someone's worth based on their past, I'd still be broke, living in a tiny apartment, wondering if I'd ever get another chance." The entire room was now hanging onto his every word. And then, before the reporter could even think of a comeback, The Rock delivered the knockout line that would leave the entire world talking. The Rock let the silence stretch for a moment, giving the weight of his words time to settle. The reporter, who had walked into this press conference expecting to land a humiliating blow, now found himself trapped in a moment far bigger than he had prepared for. Then The Rock spoke again, his voice calm but edged with something undeniable. Truth. You see, success isn't about where you start. It's about what you're willing to fight for. And I've fought for everything I have. The reporter shifted uncomfortably, gripping his microphone a little tighter, but The Rock wasn't done. You say, I don't belong. You question if I'm a real actor. But here's the thing. Who defines real? Is it a diploma, a title, a critic's opinion? Or is it the work you put in every single day? The reporter opened his mouth to respond, but The Rock didn't let him. Let's talk about your job for a second, he said, tilting his head slightly. Let's say you wake up tomorrow and decide you want to do something bigger. Maybe start your own media company, maybe write a book. Would I have the right to sit here and laugh at you, tell you that you don't belong because you started out as just a reporter? The reporter's lips pressed together. Exactly, The Rock nodded. See, I don't believe in shutting doors on people just because of where they came from. Because the people who do that, they're the ones who are scared. Scared that someone with real drive might just pass them by. A few reporters in the room let out quiet murmurs. They were seeing something rare. A man standing his ground, without arrogance, without anger, but with the kind of confidence that couldn't be shaken. You don't have to like my movies, The Rock said, finally leaning back in his chair. You don't even have to respect my career. But what you will respect is this. I work, I show up, and I don't stop. The room was silent. The reporter, who had started this moment with smugness, now looked like he wished he could disappear. And then The Rock delivered the final, unexpected blow, one that no one saw coming, but would turn this press conference into a lesson the world wouldn't forget. The Rock let the weight of his words settle before shifting his tone. Calm, measured, but unwavering. You came here today looking for a moment, didn't you? He said, his eyes locked onto the reporter. You wanted a soundbite, a slip-up, a headline that would make people talk about you. The reporter's face tightened, but he didn't respond. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room could see that The Rock had hit the truth dead center. But here's the thing, The Rock continued. You could have asked me about the movie. You could have asked me about the people I worked with, the message behind the story. But instead, you asked me if I belong. A pause. And the fact that you even have to ask tells me one thing. You still don't get it. The reporter blinked, clearly unprepared for what was coming next. See, life isn't about belonging. It's about showing up. It's about knowing your worth, even when someone else tries to question it. And it's about never, ever letting people like you decide how big someone else is allowed to dream. The words landed like a hammer, but The Rock didn't stop there. I'll tell you a little story, he continued. Years ago, when I was broke, I had about $7 to my name. No fancy career, no big future ahead of me, but I didn't sit around waiting for permission. I didn't ask if I belonged. I worked. I put my head down, and I kept moving. And every time someone told me I wasn't good enough, every time someone like you thought they had the right to decide my limits, I let my work do the talking. The reporter's breathing was shallow now. He had come into this exchange expecting to make The Rock uncomfortable, but instead, he was the one under scrutiny. So, here's my advice to you, The Rock finished, his tone lighter now, but no less firm. Next time you want to question someone's place in the world, ask yourself if you'd be able to handle the answer. For the first time since the interview started, the reporter looked away. He had nothing left to say. And The Rock? He had just turned a cheap insult into a lesson the world wouldn't forget. But the moment wasn't over yet, because what happened next would turn this exchange into an even bigger statement. The Rock let his last words settle, but he wasn't done yet. The reporter had come in with an agenda, to embarrass him, to reduce years of discipline and hard work into a dismissive joke. But what the reporter didn't realize was that he had just set himself up for a lesson far greater than a viral moment. The Rock took a breath and spoke again, his tone steady but cutting through the air like a blade. "You know what the real problem is?" he said, eyes still locked onto the reporter. "It's not me. It's not where I came from. It's not even wrestling, movies, or entertainment." A pause. Then, with precision, he hit the heart of the issue. "The problem is that some people spend their time trying to tear others down instead of building themselves up." The weight of those words was undeniable. "You sat in that chair today, ready to take a shot at me. You had your question planned. Maybe you thought it would make headlines. Maybe you thought it would get a few laughs. But here's my question for you. What have you built?" The reporter's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He still hadn't said a word. "See, I know exactly what I've built," The Rock continued. "I've built a life, a career, a reputation, and I built them on my own back through years of work, failures, and comebacks. That's the difference between us. I don't need to cut anyone else down to prove my worth. But you," a beat of silence, "you came here thinking that questioning my journey would somehow add value to yours. But it doesn't work that way. You don't rise by dragging others down. You rise by pushing yourself up." Another pause. But this time, it wasn't just the reporter who felt the impact. Everyone did. "So, next time," The Rock finished, voice steady, "instead of worrying about whether I belong, ask yourself if you do." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, because in that moment the entire world saw the difference between two kinds of people, those who question and those who prove. And just when everyone thought the moment had peaked, something even bigger happened, something that would take this lesson beyond just one reporter. The Rock leaned back in his chair, letting the final words settle. The reporter, who had arrived eager to deliver an embarrassing blow, now sat silent. His confidence shattered, his arrogance stripped away by nothing but truth. But this wasn't just about one man. This moment had become bigger. What had started as an attempt to diminish The Rock's career had transformed into something else entirely, a statement about grit, resilience, and the power of self-worth. And that statement didn't just belong to The Rock. It belonged to everyone watching, because this wasn't just about Hollywood, wrestling, or fame. It was about every single person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. It was about the kid who was mocked for their dreams, the worker who was told they'd never move up, the person who started late, started wrong, or started with nothing. And in that moment, The Rock didn't just answer a reporter. He spoke for all of them. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "If you've ever been doubted, if you've ever been told you don't belong, if someone has ever looked at your past and tried to use it against you, remember this: their words don't define you. Your work does." The world was listening now. Not just the reporters in that room, but millions who would watch this exchange unfold. So, the next time someone tries to question whether you belong, don't waste your breath proving yourself to them. Prove it to yourself. And with that, The Rock was done. The press conference moved on. The questions resumed. The world kept spinning. But the moment stayed. Because this wasn't just a clapback, it was a wake-up call. The Rock just showed us something important. You don't need permission to succeed. So, ask yourself, how many dreams have you put on hold because someone told you they weren't realistic? How many times have you second-guessed yourself because of what they might think? The truth? They don't matter. Your success doesn't come from their approval. It comes from the work you're willing to put in, so stop waiting, stop hesitating, and start proving them wrong. If this story made you think, act on it. Share this. Someone out there needs to hear it today.